April 15th, 1912. All was calm aboard the RMS Titanic, and most passengers had already turned in for the night. Little did they know that the ship of dreams would become an underwater grave. Number 10. Fred Fleet, one of the Titanic survivors, believed the Titanic could have completely avoided the iceberg had the binoculars been used instead of stowed away in an officer's locker. This key is thought to be the very one that would have unlocked the locker and given the crew members access to a pair of binoculars that may have prevented the disaster, or at least it would have helped the crew members to spot the iceberg earlier. Number 9. Ramon Artagavecha, a wealthy Uruguayan farmer, survived the sinking of the ship America in 1871 by jumping into the sea and swimming for his life. He overcame his fear of sailing and decided to sail on the Titanic. According to Ramon, it was the new system of communication, the wireless telegraph, that alleviated his fear. After all, the Titanic had the ability to communicate instantly with the world. Unfortunately, he was found among the dead a week after the disaster. Number 8. After the Titanic sank, families of the ship's band members had quite a difficult time collecting death benefits. The White Star Line wouldn't pay because the band members were contracted employees. The talent agency wouldn't pay because they were listed as second-class passengers, and they felt the cruise line should pay. In fact, some of the family members received a bill from the talent agency for the uniform the musicians were forced to buy as members of the Titanic band. Number 7. The morning before the disaster, a lifeboat drill was scheduled for the crew to prepare themselves for what they hoped would be an emergency situation they'd never encounter. However, the drill was inexplicably canceled by Captain Edward John Smith himself. It is still not known exactly why he decided to call off the lifeboat drill. Had the lifeboat drill been carried out, the crew and passengers would have been better prepared for the disaster, and more lives could have been saved. Number 6. One ship, the Californian, was even closer to the Titanic than the Carpathia was. Crew members on board the Californian saw the flares sent up from the Titanic. Regrettably, the captain of the Californian chose to ignore the distress signals, and the ship's wireless operator had already gone to bed. Had the Californian chosen to investigate the flares, many more lives could have been saved. Surely this was a decision that the captain of the Californian had to live with for the rest of his days. Number 5. Violet Constance Jessup was an ocean liner stewardess and nurse who survived the accident aboard the Olympic, the sinking of the Titanic, and the sinking of the Britannic when it hit an underwater mine. Interestingly, all three of these ships, the Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic, were sister ships, and all three encountered major disasters in the same decade. According to Violet, the one thing she missed most immediately following the Titanic disaster was her toothbrush. Number 4. While conditions on the Titanic were quite lavish for the rich, they were not so nice for the poor. The 700 third class or steerage passengers, as they were also called, only had 2 bathrooms, and 4 passengers were assigned to a room. Despite this, the Titanic's third class accommodations were actually nicer than the typical living conditions that the third class passengers were accustomed to at home. The cabins had running water and electricity, and the steerage passengers were provided with meals. Number 3. Dorothy Gibson, an American movie star, was undoubtedly one of the more famous passengers on the Titanic and was also one of the survivors. 1 month after the disaster, Dorothy starred in a silent film called Saved from the Titanic, which was based on her experiences on the night the Titanic sank. She even wore the same clothes she had worn aboard the Titanic that night, a white silk evening dress topped with a cardigan and polo coat. Number 2. Unfortunately, because the Titanic is over 2 miles down, it is very difficult or impossible to preserve. Due to rust and iron-eating bacteria, the wreck of the Titanic will be destroyed within 20 years and will soon be nothing more than a rust stain at the bottom of the Atlantic. On the positive side, more of the interior will become accessible as the outer structure disappears. This will allow researchers to gather more information on the ship before it is completely obliterated. Number 1. 14 years before the Titanic sank, a novel was written by Morgan Robertson called Futility or the Wreck of the Titan. The details of this fictitious ship named Titan were uncannily similar to the Titanic. Triple screw propellers, check. Practically unsinkable, check. Shortage of lifeboats, check. Struck an iceberg on the starboard side on an April night in the North Atlantic 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland, check, check. Sank with more than half of the passengers drowning, checkmate.